One of the biggest things about masculinity is that our foundation of our belief comes from our worldview. And just like anything in life, any construct, any belief we have is just shaped by what we grow up in and our family and the people around us. And sometimes that masculinity, a lot of times it ends up being a way to return that same knowledge and embody it in a self-fulfilling way. The world shapes us, and then we become a part of that same environment. Today's guest is Matt Naismith. He is my brother-in-law, the brother of my wife. He has 3 beautiful children, a lovely wife, a great family, and he is an ex-pastor and a heavy influence in the Christian community around the world. He has his own podcast called The Sowers, speaking about faith and its influence on our lives and the experiences of people of faith. And his perspective is one of service. How our purpose and our drive to serve those around us really shapes our responsibility as men and as humans. And this purpose comes at a cost, but also results in many rewards to ourselves, to our community, and to our family. So today's conversation is really great. I went in, I thought, well, we've got some different views on things and we might have a little bit of arguments or disagreements, and there was fewer than I thought. And maybe that speaks to who each of us are in terms of the willingness to speak and discuss and disagree in a civil manner. But in the end, I think we came together with a really nice purpose and a really nice definition for what masculinity can look like. And I do want to add before I let you go into the conversation that this is 2 cis men in heterosexual relationships, and the conversation is highly framed around that. So listening back to it, I noticed that some of the language and that kind of thing might not appeal to some audiences or may not be as inclusive as possible. And that just comes with the territory, unfortunately, and no disrespect is intended. So as usual, my name is Tyrone. You can find me at hellotyrone.ca. I haven't put my new website version out, but my website's still up there, all my links, all my socials. So please let me know if you got any ideas or any reviews, whatever. Enjoy. All right. Hello, Matt. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing, buddy? It's good to be here.
Good. I'm good as well. Thank you for coming, of course. Thank you for your time, your presence, your willingness to be here. It's an honor.
Sure. Well, it's an honor to do this. As you know, I host a podcast myself. So as I was just saying, it's nice to actually be on this side of it and be responding to some questions rather than being in the position of interviewer. So this is great.
Right. A little bit less responsibility, but
yeah. I don't know about you, but I certainly find I listen to all my episodes back and some people are like, why do you do that? But I find that when I'm actually in the middle of it doing the interviewing, you're so focused on the answer and maybe then the next question that you're going to ask that you're not always actively listening to what's happening. So this will be fun. I'm glad to be doing this, and it's nice to be doing it with family. So this is really cool.
Sweet. Awesome. Okay. Well, we'll get into it right away. This is the first question, as always asked, is what is your definition of masculinity?
Oh man, definition of masculinity. I would say servant, leader,
Servant leader.
servant leader. I think historically, when you think about masculinity or femininity, I mean, they are such broad topics, especially as you study history, culture, um, and so I think at times we can get into stereotypes related to like masculinity or femininity. And so
Mhm.
at times I'm trying to think about what is the essence of the thing? Like what would be something if it were to transcend all cultures, ethnicities, history? What is the invitation of masculinity or those who identify as male? And I would say every man across time is invited to the opportunity of servant leadership. And
Okay.
so there'd be like a number of like, connective threads, or maybe not connective threads, I would say, but, tentacles to that, two word definition.
Yeah.
But I think the invitation is towards servant leadership. Yeah.
I like that answer. And it's interesting, out of all the people that I've talked to already, I think I'm 8, 9, 10, something around there. That's probably the most like concise and immediate answer I've gotten. Um, very determined, very structured. So let's, I guess, expand on that. Like, so when you say servant leader, in what context? Who are you leading? Is it just in general? Is it to your family, to people, to the world? What is that?
Yeah, well, I think it starts with servant, and servant is someone who serves, right? It's someone who takes the posture not of needing to, and so I don't want to, confused getting into, I'll get into the leadership term in a second, but a servant is someone who serves,
Mhm.
looking out for the greater good of the people around them. How can I show up, be my best self, and elevate other people around? I think when we see the worst of masculinity, it's when men are not taking a position of that of a servant. I think this is where we get the worst sides of men across, again, history and cultures, which would be misogyny, believing and having pride and believing in a position of power. And
Right.
so that's where servants, someone who serves. And then leadership, I would say that can start with like leading oneself, and then that can transition outwards. So leading oneself, taking care of oneself. And that's not just like in a physical way, that's also like in a mental way, that's in an emotional way, that could be in a spiritual way, but truly leading oneself. And then out from there, who are the people that are within your vicinity that you can lead? And sometimes that leadership is a vocal leadership, but oftentimes that leadership is an example set. So
Yeah.
I'm going to lead others in the example that I set for them, first as I'm being a servant, and then secondly, I'm setting an example worth following. As you know this, Tyrone, I have 3 boys, and my middle son plays basketball, and he's at that age where the skill side of the sport isn't quite there. It's developing, right? By
Yeah.
skill side of the sport, I mean like shooting posture, dribbling consistency and competency. So the thing that you can at that stage of your basketball development do really well is hustle. It's
Yeah.
like, so one thing that we do before every one of his practices is actually pray with him. And I say, hey God, we're going out to practice today. Just pray for Cade that he'd have a lot of fun, he'd stay safe, and that he would more than anything like just set a good example and work hard. And the
Yeah.
primary way that I see that is in his defensive intensity. It's
Okay.
again, he may not have all the competence of his hands are in all the right places when he's playing defense, but are you the first one down the court? Are you the first one back? And
Yeah.
are you setting an example to your teammates and to those around you to say this is the level at which we're going? And so I think that from that leadership position or that leadership posture in that masculine place, it is to say I'm leading myself, I'm leading others through my influence, but then also it's being vocal. I think it's lovely to set a great example, but I think at times where we also see what we could say is maybe the worst of men is when men have not stood into a place and actually led, but rather let things happen around them. Kind of like, um, in the spiritual world, there are like sins of commission. It's like actively doing something that you should not know or you should not do. And then there's sins of omission, which would be things that you know you should do, but you fail to do it. It's like, just like apathy. It's, I don't want to get involved. I don't want to lead the way. I don't want to, put myself in a position of potentially needing to be criticized or looked down upon, even for doing the right thing. And so I think within those two realms, servant, to serve, to care about others more than you care about yourself. And then leadership, self, others, most oftentimes example, but then oftentimes also requiring a level of being vocal and setting the pace.
Nice. I like that. It's a good explanation. It makes sense. And even in your, obviously I know you and your passion and your beliefs and that kind of thing. And so hearing you relate it directly to God right away, you can almost see the description of masculinity coming from a place of religion as well. And that might be some bias I have just in my analysis of it, but is that where you think that comes from, or where is that something you developed just in your family, just from your father, or what?
Oh, well, I would say, and you know this from like your study now, right? Like no man is perfect. So there are, like, I would say, using some maybe what's known as a religious term, but I think broader than that is like redemption. Like we want to see redemption in every man. Like, so I think my definition, certainly I could not say that it is divorced from my religious conviction and what I believe about the world based upon that. But when you go through a period in your life, which regardless of your upbringing, regardless of, let's say the bias, whether you were raised in a religious environment or non-religious environment, we all face the question at some point, like, what do I believe about the nature of the universe? Why do I believe that I exist? Why do I believe that I'm here? And then from there, you start, exploring, okay, what are the worldviews that are in the world? Is it a buffet table of a whole bunch of different ones, and we pick and choose which ones we think work? And then you just start, moving away from like the big questions. And then, like, I would say like 30,000 foot questions, you get to 20,000 foot, 10,000 foot, and you go, which of these worldviews do I believe make most sense of existence, of human experience? And not just like in my particular time right now. I think you have to be really careful if you're selecting a religious viewpoint or a viewpoint in general. Like, I think my broad belief is that everyone is a person of faith, whether you believe in God, whether you don't, whether you believe in multiple gods, whether you believe in no gods, they're all positions of faith. You can't 100% prove either of them. So you need to have faith to believe in them. So when it comes to, and this is where I'll synergize and bring the two concepts together, is that as I spent time, and still, like, it's not, like every day you're still asking lots of questions. As I synergize what is like out there worldview, religious or not, best perspective on what it means to be masculine, or what it means to be a man, or to identify as a man. Like, what are we getting after, and what makes most sense of the data that we have to ourselves? And so certainly I think the Christian worldview provides a very compelling vision for manhood, for masculinity. A lot of people over the years, and we can just study the history books, have twisted that, have done insane amounts of evil with it. But at the same time, I don't think
that manhood specifically. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I think this is where we've seen historical example of misogyny. I think you could get into, issues of race and racism at certain points. But I think as you work through the question, bringing it back together, I would say Jesus, to me, is a very compelling historical figure. And then the claims that he made, I think, are quite significant. And I think if he is who he says he is, or what people have taught about, what Christians have taught about him, then he would be the ultimate example of what we could call potentially masculinity lived out. And I think that from that perspective, someone might say, well, what does Jesus represent in masculinity? I think you have sacrifice there, but I think you do have maybe, I don't certainly want to make a claim that the only way to describe Jesus in his masculinity is servant leadership, but I think servant leadership and that description would follow him quite closely. And so that's probably how I arrived there, but again, through multiple streams and human experience as well.
Okay. Yeah, I mean that all makes sense, and I'll like I said before, I like the archetype for it. Do you see it? What do you see in the world today for masculinity? Like when you have that definition now, like front of your mind, is that something that you see we are falling away from? Like we talked about various examples in history where we have fallen away from it for various reasons. What is kind of your outlook on the world right now? Are we in a safe place? I know that there's the terminology that masculinity is under attack and manhood is under attack and men are under attack, and that's because of feminism and all of that. So do you believe that to be true? Do you see it as a problem? Do you see a need to fight against it? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean that's a huge question. I would say a few different things. One is just general sociological review in my perspective, which would be we're always so good at pendulum swinging. So it's like,
Mhm.
you ask the question, like, what's the future of this? It's like,
Yeah.
well, just swing the pendulum from what our experience is now, right? Like there is, like, in the 70s and 80s, we're just looking at like religious experience within North America as an example of this. You have like heightened religious experience, like post World War II. And then you go into a season of like intense, more secularity or atheism. And now I think we're in a place in North America, at least in the United States, you're seeing it. I think also there's some connections to Canada and carry over there, but there's more interest again in religious worldviews.
Mm.
I think you could use the example of parenting styles. It's like, well, I didn't really like the way my parents did it, so I'm going to do it differently. And then you become a parent, you're midway through the journey, you're like, oh, I understand a little bit more of why my parents did it that way.
Mhm.
And so I think that, as it relates to the question of masculinity in our culture, I think as I look out, I see what I would say would be the concerning edges. I think we would have, I don't follow Andrew Tate, but I've heard that, his version of like masculinity is something to be concerned about. And based on the description of what I've heard, I would
Yeah.
agree with people.
Yeah.
Again, I think that's leaning into a misogyny. It's a power domination situation. I think on the other side, removing any and all sort of categorizations of even like the differences broadly throughout history and sociology between male and female, men and women, I see as probably the other pendulum. And
Yeah.
so if you want to like just remove religious viewpoint from it at all and just say, okay, as a society, how do we operate within this worldview? I think that, probably finding a place in the middle is important. I think that there is an invitation, as I talked about earlier, like my definition being like servant leadership, like that. There is some expectations on you being a servant and leading yourself, leading, the places you influence through your example, then leading through a vocal method. That is requiring something of you. But then on the other side, and it's sort of finds the middle point again, because it's not saying, well, this is only what you are, and then on the other side saying, no, there's nothing at all. So I think that there's a middle view. I think that we are generally tempted as a human society to oversimplify things. And I
Yeah.
think we're also very much wanting to find examples and of heroics. Like again, regardless of your worldview, like Christians at times will be like, I want a Christian celebrity because then I can feel like I'm valid in the world, or whatever worldview you represent, or a certain thing. It's like, oh, like, or whatever you're into. It's like, oh, I really like running. Oh, did you hear like this runner is like really making mainstream, or whatever it's going to be. Like we love heroes that represent our worldview in the broader culture. And I think we're
Mhm.
also attracted, like, go back to sociological study, like Jonathan Haidt, sociologist out of New York City, and he talks about how humans are tribal. So I think this probably gets into a bit of our tribal experience. I think other things broadly, I mean, the change in how the financial systems of North America and the West changed in the 1970s, and the demands, like on the liberal side, they were really wanting to pursue more individual freedom.
Yeah.
But then on the left, or on the right side, they were wanting to pursue more like market freedom, and on the left, they were wanting to pursue more individual freedom. I mean, the cost of living went up as a result. Markets changed, the global economy changed. Suddenly, men and women are both needed to work, or if you're representing a hetero relationship, you're both needing to work to provide for your family. Some people decry that and say, well, we need men to be working and women to be at home, or we need women to be working and men to be at home. Like, whatever it is, the point being is that both people, if you want to be able to make ends meet now, are required to work. And
Mm-hmm.
so, there's beauties that have come, is I think the points I'm trying to make, is that there's beauties that have come from this vision of, individual freedom or market freedom and these things, but there's also costs that come along with some of those things.
Yeah.
I mean, we oftentimes have such a shallow memory or shallow view
Yeah.
of our lives, right? Like, we don't have a very long memory. So, we're all caught in this unique time, in this unique place in history, but is it really all that unique? I mean, that's oftentimes a question I'm asking myself. But,
Mm.
for me, like, when I think about my grandmother, and my grandmother's like position and posture in the world, most of her life was spent at home caring for the needs of her kids, and making sure they got off to school, getting to sports things, like making them food. And I think at the end of her life, she would have said, I lived a very meaningful life,
Yeah.
right? And there would be people now that in our culture that would decry, like, how dare you have had to stay home and had to do that. And I think she would have said, no, like, it was
I enjoyed
absolutely
it.
my joy that I had the opportunity to do that. And so, just to sort of summarize a little bit of your question, I think that there are concerns, certainly, but, future is going to be a bit of a pendulum swing, but I think we have to be able to find culturally as a society, um, some reason to not go to the extremes, but to find meaningful ways to engage one another in the middle on these discussions and recognize people's concerns as genuine concerns, and then
Yeah.
make democratic decisions as it relates to our society that makes sense.
Yeah. The middle ground is a very hard place to sit in, right? Because when you're pendulum swinging, it's one person gets hurt, person A gets hurt, and then person B gets hurt, right? Like, it just goes back and forth, back and forth. And I think you said something very important there in terms of the short memory, right? Like, even when it comes to, I don't know if we should get too into the vaccine conversation, but like, one of the reasons that is we don't remember what it was like to have all of those diseases running rampant,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, we just don't know that experience and how it disappeared when the vaccine showed up and whatever yeah, like I said, we won't get into it, but that is a very, very strong example of us forgetting, right? So if we forget what it's like, or if we're a couple generations behind, um, we don't know that experience. We don't know what the other side of the pendulum is. And then we so easily see that grass is greener on the other side type of mentality, right? Um, so when it comes to the middle ground, though, what are the steps? How do you ease? Like, you mentioned, like, Andrew Tate. Um, if our next generation, like, I guess which way would we be swinging from here? I think we'd swing back to a more structured masculine feminine dichotomy, because we're kind of on the other side right now, I would say, in most places, and that's where we're swinging. If we're talking about Alberta, the pushes against trans rights and other things like that, so that would be the disillusion of the kind of dichotomy of the two archetypes. So how do we protect from swinging so far into the Andrew Tate realm, we'll call it?
Oh, how do we protect from swinging? I think it's having a vision for what it is. I mean, this is, I remember someone close to me, um, and this is just simply used as an example. I mean, I'm sure a number of your listeners may not come from like a particular, commitment to a particular religious worldview, but this person said, there was a difference in their mind when they were in a relationship or dating somebody that had a model of masculinity to look to, right? And from someone who didn't. And I think it has to do with like self-betterment to some degree. It's like, do we have a strong example of what the optimal masculine person is? Now, from a Christian worldview and faith perspective, I would say I think Jesus is very compelling. And if you're not from like a Christian worldview, I still think Jesus is a compelling figure to potentially model your life after, right?
Absolutely.
But I think we need, now again, this would get maybe more philosophical and more spiritual, but I think we're all longing. I believe that there's a hole in every single human heart, and we're all longing and needing that example. Because I think right now what we're doing and what's happening in society is we're putting examples forward, but none of them are perfect examples. It's like, oh, I want to take a little bit of that one. I want to take a little bit of that one. I think it's fascinating. I think a lot of people would find it fascinating, regardless of, and I don't listen to a lot of his lectures or follow him super closely, but, Jordan Peterson was attracting the attention of a lot of young men. And I think, not to make specific comments on him in particular, but it's an example that young men or men in general were looking for an example to follow.
Yep.
And I think where he was unfairly categorized, and the unfortunate, I remember one interview I did see with him, and he started crying because he was like, I get all of this flack for trying to, be an example to young men. Well, what are the people that are criticizing me? What example are they giving for young men to follow? And I think it was a fair critique or a fair pushback to say, what are we presenting? What are we presenting to young men to be wanting to pursue as a vision for what it means to be human, what it means to live a strong and good life? Because, and this was something else I saw actually recently, someone had a hat on that said, more fathers, less government. And I don't know if in your podcast, you've gotten into this very much, but there are correlations if you just look at the statistics around fatherlessness, like lack of presence of physical fathers in the lives of kids. And it correlates to a whole host of just like both personal and societal challenges and issues and concerns. And so the tagline was more fathers, less government. Like if there were more present fathers in their lives of their children, the world would be a remarkably better place, and we may need less government to legislate and to provide the services, because fathers are staying in their homes, taking care of their families, and taking care. I don't just mean that in the sense of a economical perspective, but again, going back to the servant leadership, it's taking stock of the home and saying what is needed for this home and this collection of people to thrive in this season and in the next.
And so I think we got our first disagreement. And I think that father presence is important, and that we're using father, but I think it can be translated into just various roles. So I don't think it necessarily needs to be a father, but to stay on that line, I don't think less government is necessarily a requirement for that to happen. And I can use an example. I think it was one of the Nordic countries. I can't remember which one, but they mandated paternity leave. They said, if you have a child, you're a father, you have to take X amount of paternity leave. So the government got more involved in the process of capitalism or their economic structure, and created space for the father to be at home, and everything went up. The quality of life, wages, better education, like everything went up. So I think that is a kind of a, I don't know the exact word, like a red herring maybe. It's being used as kind of a scapegoat. And obviously there are issues with bureaucracy and government that take away and detract from the family home. But yeah, I think that is something.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily saying like less government. Like I am a fan of good government. We can have a lot of discussion about like good or bad government. But I think I wouldn't have I wouldn't wear the hat. I would say just more fathers equals like better society. There may be some results on some form of need upon government support, but yeah, I mean the presence of fathers, and I think that paternity leave is a fantastic example of the value and need for both the presence of engaged parents in the life of children, especially in the early years of development. So yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah. Um, yeah. Oh, I had a question. Where was I going to go with it? The host life. Yeah. So when we're talking about kind of that structure, I guess I find that a lot, and this is, I guess, just because of my orientation, I guess we'll call it. But a lot of the conversations when it comes to masculine and feminine end up talking about kind of just the nuclear family in a way, right? The father mother dichotomy. Is there, in your personal life, what kind of feminine energy would you say you bring to the table? Because it's known that we all have a sense of both. And can you define it? What would you call it? How do you ensure that it's brought out in important times?
Yeah, I would say. I mean, that's a great question. I think I think there's like again become. I think the question is probably based a little bit on like our particular moment and culture in time as what is broadly considered as being like masculine traits or feminine traits or
Mm-hmm.
characteristics. Those, as we look at history, have changed, ebbed and flowed. What would be current in our present moment as being more considered, more would be more considered as feminine traits. I would say a nurturing, broadly like a nurturing experience with my kids.
Mm-hmm.
So um, I think there are some things that are broadly typically more feminine characteristics and some that are broadly more masculine characteristics. But I think that I have to do a much better job in my life as a father in my home being more nurturing,
Mm-hmm.
not trying to present a solution to a problem when what I'm probably being asked is to just be a present listener, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm sure we've all had those moments, or you know, the usually what happens in our home is that when our boys are feeling something and want to just like sit in their feelings, like they'll go to mom, and I
Mm-hmm.
don't think that there's anything. I don't think there's something wrong with that. Now, can I be better in those moments with them? Absolutely. Because vice versa, when they want to go outside and run around and play and do things like that, like they'll go, "Hey, Dad, do you want to go outside and throw the ball around?" And I'll be like, "Yeah, let's go."
Sounds
Um,
great.
but what I want to be able to do is um, move away for me from what may feel like normal or natural activity towards things that may not be as natural to me. Again, moving back to that definition of servant, because my role is to serve them, to help them. And what do they need in this moment right now? And if
Mm-hmm.
what they need in this moment right now is, hey, like, come cuddle, like, when I put you to bed at night, I'm not just gonna, okay, see you later, turn the lights off and head off. Maybe tonight what you need is me to lie in your bed with you
Yeah.
and to cuddle you and um, not necessarily say very much. Maybe just ask you a couple questions, but tell you that I love you, tell you that I'm proud of you,
Right.
and be present. Again, that would probably be something that may feel a bit more, again, in our culture as being stereotypical feminine, but I think that there is real value in being that type of father in our home with our boys.
Mm-hmm.
I think as I get older, I want to be more aware of my emotions, be able to name them so that I'm able to help my kids name their emotions when they're experiencing them. Like I
Yeah.
think a lot of men struggle and they would say the only and I've asked guys lots of questions like this, like, what emotions do you feel? And like anger's at the top of the list. And
Mm-hmm.
I remember when I was in counseling and in therapy, my counselor, after about 45 minutes of being in the room with her, she said, "How are you feeling right now?" And I said, well, I don't really know. And she had a feelings wheel. If you don't know what a feelings wheel, like
Yeah.
Google it,
Oh,
but
yeah.
a wheel with a bunch of feelings on it. And she said, which one do you align with? I said, well, anger. She's like, yeah, that's pretty typical of a male response. And then she said, what else? I said, disappointed. She's like, oh, interesting. Disappointed. Why? I said, because I'm sitting here with you.
Yeah.
And I mean, that was the beginning of a great, year and a half, like weekly intensive time together. But
Mhm.
I think that for me, I'm wanting to be more aware, as I said, of my emotions. And if that is characterized as being traditionally or stereotypically more feminine, I think that that is a really important trait, not only for myself and my own betterment, like in leading myself, but also in influencing one, the home that I have probably the greatest level of influence in,
Mhm.
and then moving out from there into the relationships that exist outside of my home or into my neighborhood. Like I think Tyrone, I'm becoming more convinced of um, what are the environments that I actually lead or have influence in,
Yeah.
and recognizing probably the greatest level that we all have influences in our homes. It's not bad to want to influence the world around us. I was really convicted actually during COVID. This struck me, and this is maybe just a pointed example to this, is that I could know the number of people in the world that had COVID, but would I know if my neighbor who lives right beside me had COVID?
Hmm.
Because I could probably have a greater influence, on my neighbor next door. They get COVID. I go, well, hey, I'll go stand in line and get your groceries, or I'll go pick them up, or what do you need?
Yeah.
But broadly, the influence on the global scale, other than minding my distance and eliminating lots of cross points with lots of different people,
Yeah.
it was probably less. So trying to focus more in the home, and the places where I can definitely influence.
I think that's super important. I love that you understand the blend, and like there's a question that comes to mind, and it's kind of rhetorical, but it's like, how can you, like, in your definition of servant leader as a masculine figure, like how can you even lead if you don't even know yourself, right? So that
Mm-hmm.
that is part of good leadership, is understanding all of you. And I think this is a generational thing, because you see so much more about millennial dads being more involved in wanting to understand their emotions and wanting to explore that, and foster it, and be a part of that quote unquote feminine side of the family structure in the home. Um, so it makes sense, and I love it, and yeah, it's great to hear that. And then when it comes to influence, it's funny because I'm kind of going through the same thing. It's like influence the home. And then we were talking about the comedy fests, and I'm kind of upper management there now. And even my boss there, the owner, he said, I don't think you know how much influence you have over these people, like the
Mm.
management team there, and they look up to you and that kind of thing. And it's like, okay, well, now I have to reflect, and like everything I say kind of has some weight to it, right? Like, what are my words really telling people? How am I uplifting them? What can I do with that? How can I nurture that? And then translating that to the kids and the nurturing. It's like, if I really want to nurture you, not only from an emotional presence and emotional security, but how can I ensure that when you're ready to flap your wings and take your first flight and jump out of the nest, like really make sure that you're prepared to do so, whether you succeed or fail, right?
Mm-hmm.
And become your own version of a servant leader. And even in saying that, it's like, okay, well, we labeled that as the masculine, but the masculine traits in a way, but how that also can apply to females and the feminine side and everybody in between, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
so it's
Yeah.
interesting how it all comes together, I think. But
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
what do you think is kind of, I guess, as a father, like your goals for your children? Like, how do we talked a little bit about kind of balancing both those sides, but when you're fostering or recognizing traits in them, how are you giving them autonomy while also leading them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Great question. I certainly don't get this all right. Um, there's a great book out there called Intentional Father, and I think he compares, if I recall the book correctly, like 5 different, I'm not going to remember all the I's. They all begin with I. And, the first I would be like the least involved, like basically absent. And then the final I would be intentional. And that would be like the goal of being a father is an intentional father. And number 4, he said, is involved. So I think that that's really fascinating. Like the 4th level would be involved. So from all intensive purposes, from those on the outside that would be looking at you as a father, they would be saying, wow, that father's really involved. Now, that's a great thing to shoot for because maybe you're not very involved. But then the next level is intentional. And the intentional father takes stock on the motivations of their children's heart. They're trying to not just understand the physical being that is before them, but they're trying to understand the motivations behind this physical being and the ways in which they can breathe and build life into them based upon how they're motivated.
Yeah.
So I'll give you an example of this in the life of my kids, and I'm okay sharing this because I've shared it in other public settings before. My oldest is a fairly, I would say, traditional or stereotypical oldest. So fairly driven, wants to has a strong, probably internal clock of like what is right and wrong. And as a result, associates their value with how they exist or perform in the world, right? Like typically more motive or more when they do something that they're not proud of, like more typical to go to like a shame position. So for him, I think then a challenge for him as it relates to my love as a father is going to be connected to how well he's listening to me and how well he's performing in front of me.
Right.
Now, I'm also an oldest child, so I understand this a little bit more. But for me, but when I put him to bed at night, I'll say, hey, son, did you know that I'm proud of you? And I said, do you know why? Now, he knows the answer to this, but the answer is because you're my son. So I'll say, hey, son, did you know that I'm proud of you? Do you know why? Yeah, because I'm your son. Because I want him to understand that I'm proud of him, not because of the things that he did that day in obedience to me or, the good or the negative. Like I will be proud of him because he's my son, period. My second son, he's more of like he's a pretty, again, traditional middle child, like both his older brother and his younger brother have like fairly large personalities. So he's pretty used to kind of just having to learn how to go with the flow, but probably the most cuddly, compassionate, probably most nurturing and empathetic of our 3 kids. And so for him, I'll say, hey, did you know that I love you? And same thing. Well, do you know why that I love you? Why? Well, you're my son. And they'll say, I'm your son now. Because again, for him, it's like knowing that love. Now, does that mean that I love my middle son and I'm proud of my oldest, but I'm not proud of my second son? Or no, it means that as an intentional father, what I'm trying to do is understand the interior motivations of their individual hearts and saying, what is the thing that they need from a father for me to speak life into or to call out of them most or remind them of? Yeah. And then with my youngest son, I'm still figuring it out a little bit. But it will be something, it's probably going to be something along the lines of, hey, did you know that you're really special to me? Or did you know that I really like you? And again, the answer will be the same because you're my son. Regardless of your attitude, regardless of your behavior, like, period, you are mine. And that's why you have my love. That's why you have my pride. And that's why you have like all my affection.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the starting place with my boys is I want them to be raised in the world. Hopefully now there's lots of influences upon their life, but not being influenced in such a way that, hopefully they can grow up to live in the freedom of the love of their father.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, for me, and my worldview and faith, and then I want them to also understand that that's the same love of our Heavenly Father through Jesus. They have that as well. And I think that will hopefully breathe life and a freedom into them and a joy. Now, that doesn't mean I don't raise my voice with them and I'm regularly apologizing. Like, I think the one thing that, and this isn't me, like people will ask Andrea, and even my boys have asked my wife, Andrea, they've said, hey, what do you wonder if from like when we started dating, we started asking each other in the early days, it was like, hey, what do you like about me? Then it became, once we said we loved each other, then it became, hey, what do you love about me today? And, she will say, Matt will always apologize. And I don't say that as like patting myself on the back, but in such a way that I think have recognized that it's important for me to apologize in front of my kids and to my kids,
Mm-hmm.
because I want them once again to not see me as this domineering, do what I say and I don't own my stuff type of person,
Right.
but a person that is trying to serve and to care and to love our family in such a way that it's an example worth following and willing to admit when I've made mistakes and when I've crossed the line. Because
Yeah.
then my hope is that they'll also be boys and then men that will also be willing to admit when they're wrong and be able to own the consequences of their decisions and not try to avoid them and not try to be a victim of those things, but to press in and to step forward.
And I think just that there's no shame in being wrong, right? Like so often in
Hmm.
households and with critiques and that kind of thing, when you are wrong or when you've made a mistake, and if you're not willing to apologize, a lot of times it's, well, I'm ashamed of admitting that I did the wrong thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I think that's the transition and that transition point between leadership to servant, right? It's like, if I'm trying to lead you all the time and I make a mistake and I'm unwilling to be wrong, I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to keep barreling forwards. But when you can have a smooth transition into the servant realm and say, hey, I'm here to serve you in terms of your future and guide you along a good path, I have to take a step down and humble myself and say, well, yeah, you know what? I didn't serve you in that time. I got
Mm-hmm.
caught up in my own thing. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I like that. I like Um, yeah, we're coming kind of to the end. I think we've explored a lot of stuff. You have any questions for me, Matt?
Yeah, I guess what are you finding? I mean, you're interviewing people specifically on this question of masculinity. What would you say are the things that are similar? Are there similarities in the definitions as you're asking the question? Are you finding there's a lot of variation? As the person doing the interviews, are you drawn to one over the other, and why? I mean, you're really like getting the case study and getting to experience a little bit of that answer. So, what are
Mhm.
your findings so far as you asked people this question?
Yeah, I've actually been thinking about it a lot, and because what I've found is that there are a few certain traits, and it's one kind of responsibility, right? You're serving whatever it may be, and it might be a thing too. It might be, hey, I have committed to something, so I am accountable to the its completion in the most successful form, right? So I don't know, if you want to work on a car or something, I'm going to finish the job, right? If I have kids, I want to raise them in a good way,
Mm-hmm.
subjectively good way, I guess. So there's the responsibility. Leadership is kind of there. It's kind of contextual, I would say. I feel that it's either leadership or sacrifice.
Hmm.
I'm willing to kind of give up maybe a piece of me to um, lead the way, right? To be there for you, to get the thing done that you might need. I want to take the load off your shoulders. That would be a common theme. Those are the two main ones. So when you said like servant leader, I'm like, yeah, that really kind of sums it up quite well.
Hmm.
The other portion of it is the energy. Um, One of the better, all right, well, I felt better definitions I heard was that as opposed to being kind of like cultural representations of it, it is more of just an internal energy. And we all have both feminine and masculine qualities, and over time and history, as you described, like they ebb and flow into which one is more dominant and where the priority might be. And I really like that concept because it allows for us to be men in whatever kind of capacity that those energies exist, right? They are there. We know they're there. I think we've gone through a period where the feminine side was quite subdued, and the masculine side was very, I don't know, I don't want to say celebritized, but like really put to the forefront, where it's like, this is what you need to be in order to be successful and happy. And I think it came at a large cost to the feminine side, which then gets put on females in general, or the LGBTQ community and that kind of thing. It's just kind of seen as a weaker side, which is very dangerous and patriarchal and harmful for many reasons. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. I like the energy. I like that we both have both. I think we have to have both to be happy. And I think that going forward, I think that putting out conversations and having these conversations where we can talk about it in a civil manner, where it's like, what are we doing? Like, why are we not acknowledging this part of us? Because we see the harmful effects of internally and outwardly if we choose to subdue one side or the other completely. Because like you said, the pendulum doesn't, it's not great to say the least. And then beyond that, even, it becomes kind of like a disillusion of the lines drawn, where it's okay, if we completely get rid of this dichotomy, how dangerous is that? Is it necessary to have? Do we need outward cultural representations of it? What does that become, right? Because we're evolving as what we're attracted to, what we need, whether it's intellectual or emotional attraction. There's so much that goes into it, and like you said, it's not. We like to try and simplify it to make it easy for us to sell it to the world, but it's such a complex issue. I don't know, well, whether you say issue or just topic, that I think the only way forward is to just explore and keep exploring and see where it goes. Right? So,
yeah, it's very interesting, right? Because just in reflecting back on what you said there, right, there are these like feminine or more masculine traits, right? And in some sense, that's relying upon probably like a broad understanding of what is feminine and what is masculine, or what is male and what is female. I mean, that's a really interesting thing, because again, through different times, histories, cultures, peoples, it just, there are stereotypes, right? Like men have short hair, women have long hair. Well, when that was maybe a particular time when there was more short or long. I think what's really fascinating is to really study, like, through all of time, what were the uniquenesses, or what were the traits or characteristics of males, and what were those same things of females. And some people have done some work on this over the years, or what are the broad distinctions. Now, that isn't to say that there aren't unique cases. Like, for example, and this is just using an example, I read a book not long ago called "The Case Against the Sexual Revolution" by a woman named Louise Perry. And I mean, listeners can go and look at some of her work. Really fascinating. And she's done some great like debates and conversations as where she has arrived as far as her sociological view. But she would, for example, say that men typically have a higher sociosexuality than women. Now, that isn't to say that there aren't some women who have a higher sociosexuality than men, kind of like saying like, well, all women are shorter than men. Well, no, there will be some unique cases where some women are taller than men and some men are shorter. But it is to say that generally there are these broad categorizations. And I think that one of the things, getting back to what I see in our culture, is that like finding that middle place, I think is important. I think it is important still too, in the midst of that, to allow male and female differences to exist. Now, that isn't to say that there won't be exceptions, but I think that one of the concerns, as I said, on kind of the other side, away from the like, well, this is what it means to be a man and no other way, and the other side is, well, let's get rid of that altogether. And I think it's important because of the sake of like conversations like this one, or what you're
Mhm.
saying around, well, these ones were understood as being maybe more male traits, or men, traits that be associated with men. And these ones are more associated with feminine or female traits. And it's important to say, no, well, that doesn't always have to be the case. And again, going back to maybe the definition I presented, it's like, it's a man asking himself in a context, in a situation, what is required of me in this time, in this season, right now? Like, as I said earlier, I don't think that has to be that the man is out and he is the primary breadwinner of the family. If it makes more sense in a family for the woman to be doing that with her work, and him to be at home with the kids. Like, I think those are some examples of historical poor examples in which men have maybe dominated, or even currently.
Yeah.
Because again, I think that the heart behind what I hope would be the in that situation of a hetero relationship, the male's example in that is to say, what is going to be the best thing for the state of my family and the health of it? And as I am a servant leader in this home, how can I make sure that my wife is thriving? How can I make sure my kids are thriving? And maybe it's even against your own wishes. And I think this is the key thing, right? About being a servant. It's looking for the needs of others ahead of the needs of oneself. So saying, I am going to put my needs to the side for the sake of the whole. Now, that doesn't mean that you never, you know, get anything for oneself. It's for the sake of like your own well-being and things like that.
Mhm.
But it is to say, how do I help this unit flourish? And if there is somebody that I think, um, should be held accountable for that flourishing, I think that's the invitation for men. And that's where I would say, and that isn't to say women aren't responsible for it, but I always typically find, like in our house, right, who's doing the vacuuming, who's mowing the lawn, whose primary responsibility is. And I think that's where, I think, in a hetero relationship, like a men's responsibility can be to say, I will be the one that is constantly aware and keeping track of how we're doing as a family, and is pursuing its thriving, its betterment. And if you're not in a relationship, it's the same. It's the same for yourself in the way that you're influencing the society around you. It's saying, how can I continue to invest and to build and to see human flourishing broadly in the areas and in the environments that I can influence it.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. That description is interesting because it's like that, like if we stripped out all men from society, which would obviously never happen, but if that is, so do women now take on what, or a masculine trait in doing that because they must, or like if you've got a, yeah, right, like that as you describe that, it becomes less of a masculine trait in my eyes. It's like, well, if we don't do that, women will do that, right? Like even Callie's like, well, she leads in a lot of ways and does a lot of things, and it's so there's such a balance that's where it's like, okay, well, how do we dissolve those lines? Do we have to label those traits as masculine and feminine? And obviously they historically have been, but yeah, very interesting.
Yeah, I think there's going to always be, like, for a number of years, like I was doing a lot of counseling with couples, right? Pursuing like long-term relationships with one another. And, I'd oftentimes remind them, like, your relationship is not the relationship next door.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to be able to celebrate one another's strengths. You have to be able to identify one another's weaknesses, not hold those weaknesses in one another's faces. And
Mm-hmm.
so there are certainly going to be, women that have a stronger impulse towards leadership. And that's not to say they shouldn't in any way use that. Now, maybe leadership in that term, it could be maybe a broader term. I mean, that's maybe getting into a semantics, but I think that again, it would be, and this is again where I would be counseling those men that I'm in relationship with, is like, if your woman has a strong impulse towards leadership, celebrate that, support her, um, go for it. But also, don't be standing in the way, and
Yeah.
be one that is, again, that's where I like to go super broad and just say, it's simply, I think, your invitation, if we were to put it that way, you could go invitation or responsibility to make sure that everyone in the family, given their giftedness, their temperaments, is able to thrive. And so if that means you not exerting yourself at certain points, at certain places, then that's great. But, I'd want to, if I were to say that there would be something that I think we see in men historically that is definitely can be concerning, is I think men at times can slip into apathy more easily than women do. Sure. And so from that perspective, I wouldn't want to what I'm saying, to be totally, well, just like, don't say anything at all. Don't do anything at all. But instead to say, again, in that intentional versus involved, like intentionally aware of how your spouse ticks, what makes her excited, what brings her and gives her life, and making sure that you are celebrating, elevating those things, but then also not becoming a silent voice that's not involved at all. Because I know lots of examples of that, both throughout history and presently of, again, dads that were there, but they rarely said something and they needed to step in and they didn't. And so I would just, want to be encouraging, like, hey, there's a place for you, an important place, and don't diminish it.
Fair enough. Okay. Well, we'll wrap up here. So 2 things. One, go plug your podcast. I want listeners need to hear about it.
Yeah. So I have a podcast called The Sowers. And what's maybe interesting about that is I interview people from across Canada, generally people that are in the church space, but lots of different backgrounds, people from all different parts of the world that have moved here to Canada. The tagline is the podcast is to help people follow Jesus in the places they live, work, learn, and play. But there's lots of really keen and interesting stories on there that transcend Christian faith. And so if you want to hear life through somebody else's perspective, then you can check that out. And it's available on all the major platforms, Instagram at the Sowers Pod, and Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube.
Okay, amazing. And then last, if you have a message to the world, to the listeners, to somebody specific, we would love to hear it.
Yeah, two things come to mind, Tyrone. So if that's okay, one is keep going. Many people just need to hear, like, keep going. Every day is really hard. And if all you have is the next half hour, keep going for the next half hour. If all you have is the next hour or to the end of the day, keep going. And then the second thing, and this is usually the tagline at the end of every one of my emails, but you are loved. And certainly that's from a faith perspective, but I believe that you're loved. And whether you know it or not, you're loved by an infinite creator that loves you. So
amazing. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Matt.
Thanks, buddy.